there.
Hi.
Good evening and welcome to the Nerd Herd, where we share what we heard and cover politics from across the country. I'm OG. Tonight we are going to be talking to our guest, Fela, and from the great state of Texas. We'll be discussing redistricting and the ongoing Senate race between John Cornyn and Kim Paxton and its local and national impacts. So let's get to it. Welcome, Fela.
Hello. It's good to be here.
So, let's talk about redistricting for a minute. Texas has been in the news. They have chosen to do uh, mid census redistricting. Um, and that is going to have impacts across the country because several states are going to follow their lead, including California, Missouri, Ohio, New York, Illinois, Indiana, and Florida so far. Um, what are your thoughts about how that's going to play out?
So, a little bit of backstory. We have done several times, we've used mid census redistricting. Typically, it's when we have a huge population increase. So, back in, I
Right.
believe it was 2003, we had a much higher population increase mid census, right? So we did have redistricting then, and everybody went back and forth and said this isn't okay. And one of the things Texas does do is they do a really good job of packing and cracking those districts. And so it saw challenges in 2003. We had challenges in 2021 when they did the redistricting and again packed and cracked districts. When this happened, we had at this in 2021, we also had a 38-day quorum break. So in 2021, they said we are denying quorum and we are not going to play your dirty game. And they turned around and ultimately the maps went through the courts. We had some issues back and forth in the courts, and this still is the maps we landed on. Now the current redistricting, they chose to do it mid census, and the reason I gave you some background, we only had about half of the population increase this time as we did in 2003. So what we've done is we've kind of used that, oh, we had an increase as this excuse to go redistrict. Now, there's some good things and some bad things about it, right? We're going to have a few areas that are going to have a small, like, piece of a percent increase in balance, right? Where it is more balanced, but that's not what they're focusing on. So, what they've done is they've taken a lot of our Democratic strongholds. They've also taken anything that might have leaned a little bit too far, and they've packed and cracked those districts. One district, for example, Jasmine Crockett, she had a diverse district. There was not enough of any demographic to consider this an entire, like, to consider anything predominantly anything. Okay, so it wasn't predominantly white, it wasn't predominantly black, it wasn't predominantly Hispanic. She had a very diverse district. Now they have redrawn the lines. It looks kind of like spaghetti thrown at the wall. So her district kind of does this little swoop, and now her district is predominantly black. And one thing that the Voting Rights Act says is we can't, this can't be considered on race. So what they've done is they've packed down in South Texas several Hispanic areas together in the hopes that they'll gain those votes because they were more Republican leaning in the last election. And then again, like up in North Texas, in Dallas, where they've done that. The other thing they've done is they've gone into some areas that have one or two of our districts are going to have people that already are representatives competing against each other. And this is going to further dilute the voting power of the people, but that's not the only thing. One of the biggest issues we have with this redistricting is that it takes economic resources out of the district. So what happens is they're bringing this straight up to the line of like Dallas Love Field Airport or Meacham, or we're coming right up to the line of Texas Instruments, or we're coming right up to the line of all of these resources that would be for the district, right? So if we're not going all the way through and including Lockheed in the district it's in its neighborhood because we want to slide it over to this other district, that seriously diminishes some of the economic power of the district and unbalances it. So it is, in its own effect, it is redlining with a little bit of flair. Now we've had some legal challenges to these district maps, and we'll see how that plays out. Last time we had a legal challenge in 2021, they said, "Oh, well, this is we specifically didn't consider race." This time, there have been a few representatives that were like, "Well, no, we wanted to get we wanted to include these two Hispanic areas." So, and now it's not the governor saying that, it was a representative, I believe, out of Houston. So, one of the things that we have to be very careful of is to read very critically. If you're seeing on the news, read very critically the comments coming from anyone purporting that these are great redistricting maps. They weren't great in 2021. They weren't great in 2025. So I'm wondering when we're going to be great again.
Good question. One of the other questions I have is, how does this affect the constituents in those districts?
So it does speak back to the economic power, right? What the district can do to help benefit their constituents. It also tends to reduce the amount of ability for constituents to be able to interact with their representative. So, for example, if you're talking a span of about 30 miles across the district, that's not all that concerning, right? But when you look at it from a standpoint of you've got someone who is typically used to going to see their representative in their local area if they have questions, concerns, or there's some sort of organization that needs assistance, now we are coming into a place where now they have to go outside of their town and go find one. And that's true in rural areas many times, but when we're talking about within our major cities, like Jasmine Crockett, was her home was drawn out of her district. Mark Vesey as well. So when we're talking about the way that that affects their constituents, now they're going to have to travel further to reach out to the representative. Now in the major metropolitan areas, that may not be that alarming to people. They're like, I go to Dallas all the time, or I go into Houston all the time. That doesn't immediately make people think, wait, this can be a problem. What this does is land doesn't vote. We don't have large cities all over our state. We have several metropolitan areas, and we have a very vast rural state. We're something like 800 miles across. So with that 800-mile span, you're going to have an issue where you have a lot of individuals that are needing to see their representative. They're going to have something that they need to present. Now they have to drive hundreds of miles in some cases. One of the districts out in West Texas that they've redrawn is so vast that for that representative to be able to effectively represent their district, they're going to have to divide pieces of their time to each part of the district, or they won't be able to travel from point A to point B in a business day, right? Or constituents won't be able to reach their representative as easily. Say you wanted to go into somebody's office because you needed help with a state agency. Let's give you a hypothetical. Hypothetically, you have the Attorney General's office and you have an issue communicating with them, right? So what you need to do is you need to reach out to your representative for help. So if you were to do that and you lived in one of these rural districts, there are times you may have to, you're going to have to take the whole day off of work, not be able to do it on your lunch hour, right? You're not going to be able to step in and have a meeting and maybe take a half day. You're going to have to leave early in the morning, drive all day, and then get to see your representative for just a few minutes before you have to run back. So these are things that they don't consider when it comes to constituents reaching out to their representative. Is what burden does it put on the constituents? This isn't just about voting. This
I think we lost your sound.
Okay, do you have my sound back?
Very much so.
Okay. Sorry if there's any background noise. But I had a headset that was the battery was going on me. So, but
Okay.
I think that that's important. And sorry for that little technical glitch. But I think that it's important to note that we need to support our constituents as a state into being able to reach their representative. And if you can't reach your representative, what is then the point of having one?
Right. Um, I mentioned earlier, let's take this out to a national level. I mentioned earlier the states that are going to redistrict or are considering redistricting. Some Republican led states and some Democratic led states. In this battle for seats in the House of Representatives. Um, we've got, like I said, we've got California, Missouri. They're already in the process. We've got Ohio, New York, Illinois, Indiana, and Florida. Um, how has this affected the normal, what Texas has done, and at the behest of, arguably at the behest of Donald Trump? How has this affected the normal politics of midterm elections?
So normally, and this is a little bit of a critique of my state, so please forgive me, everyone in Texas. Texas is apathetic. We typically have this attitude of, yeah, I'll get around to it when it comes to voting, right? And they tend to pay attention just every several years when it's it's the national scene, right? One of the things that you hear often in Texas is, oh, the Democrats have ruined our state. Since when? Because we haven't had Democratic representatives on a national scene, right, to represent us in Congress. We have a few, don't mistake, but as a whole, we haven't had a Democratic majority in over 30 years. And so it does come down to the messaging that they send. This has been the message for a very long time. So when we're talking about in midterm elections, it has I think that there's a portion of the base that has been energized by this, that are like, wait a minute, I don't like to see what's going on. When it came to the redistricting maps, we had a representative, I'm sorry, not a representative, but an attorney out of, I believe it was San Antonio or Houston, that had gone to the hearings, and he flat said, I am a Republican. I have never voted for anyone except for a Republican. What you're doing is against the law. And so we even have Republicans that are standing up going, wait a minute. So on a national scale, one of the things that I find interesting is that it is not only energizing some of the base, but is angering some of the base as well. So we have a lot of Republicans that have just kind of slid by on the party they're in. And I think that's going to make it much harder to do so during midterm elections. One thing to note about this is that there's also been this push for the census, right? They want to do a mid-year census redo. If that happens, the likelihood is Texas will lose representation instead of gain representation. So this will be counterproductive. One of the things that I think that it's important to recognize also with California in their response to Texas, our state went, oh no, California can't mess with their maps. Let's sue them. Like there are legal challenges right now from Texas representatives in California. You know what's interesting though? Texans don't get to vote on statewide ballot measures, right? We don't have that opportunity. So what California is doing is they're putting it on a ballot. They're saying, do you want to vote to redistrict and would you approve it? So the constituents of California will get to decide whether there's going to be a new map. That's why they have that independent redistricting board. That's why they'll be able to
Right.
reach out to them. Right. They'll be able to reach out to them and say, hey, as constituents, we would love for you to redraw these maps, right? In Texas, they're like, we said this is what you're going to do. So I think that it's important to note that we need, as a state, more interactive representatives that are representing the state and not the party.
I agree. Just as a reference point, I wrote down here that one of your districts was diluted so much that it went from 70% Democratic to 40% Democratic. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the important things to note is what we don't want is any party having 100% representation. We want all parties to have an equal representation so that their equal ideologies, or so their ideologies can be considered as equal. And one of the things that I think that we forget is that this is not red team, blue team. This is not a decision to say, I just want to win because I agree with this ideology and everyone else should be forced. And I'll give you an example. And I know we're going to talk about him later, but just to throw a little aside in here, Ken Paxton, for example, has been pushing for the 10 Commandments in schools and prayer in schools now that he's lost that challenge, right? He was challenged and said, oh, you can't do this. This is against the First Amendment, which it is. And then, so instead of getting what they wanted, he said, oh, well, then we're going to do prayer in schools, but no Muslim prayer in schools. Only Christian prayer in schools. Now that doesn't represent our base. We have a very diverse country. We have a very diverse state. And so when we're looking in areas like Frisco in Plano, we have a multicultural area. And this not only is a group of people, like it's a rather affluent area. So there isn't as high of a poverty rate in something like Plano or Frisco as there is in like Dallas or Grand Prairie or Fort Worth, right? So when we're talking about the economics of it, when we're talking about the the interpersonal interactions we're going to have with our representatives, and then what our representatives are kind of pushing for, we end up having a lack of representation instead of an increase in representation.
So let's get into the down and dirty since you brought him up. Let's talk about the dirty politics down in Texas and John Cornyn and Kim Paxton running for the Senate and everything that Ken Paxton represents. There has been a whole drama, a whole soap opera around Kim Paxton. And I'm going to let you elaborate on that because
So-
you can speak to it better than I can.
So I have to start this by saying, this is my opinion. This is how I feel. And this is just my thoughts on the matter.
Oh, but there's
Angela
some
didn't let us
facts in
divorce
there.
him a long time ago. I don't know what we're waiting on. Right? We have a state senator who is married to our state attorney general. And this man, she knows, she can't not know he's crooked. Can't not know. So, as much as, look, between Republicans themselves, right? We have good Republicans. Unfortunately, they're not getting the support of the party. And when that is the case, we end up seeing, like we have with John Cornyn, who is a very balanced individual. There's been some rumor back and forth. Everybody has something to say back when he was attorney general of, oh, he did this wrong or he did that wrong. There was some servicing issues with the child support division. There's always servicing issues with the child support division. But for example, Ken Paxton has been outsourcing some of the litigation and some of the basic just legal footwork that needs to be done to his buddies, his friends, and other individuals instead of doing it in-house, thereby costing the state quite a bit of money. So while John Cornyn, when he was the attorney general, was he had privatized our servicing for like specifically that for like the child support division, where they added to they sent out, they outsourced the servicing, so the payment processing and all of that is third party instead of in-house. So one of the problems we have with that is that if you don't have the entirety of your party pushing you to make decisions in one way or another, lest you lose your job, then John Cornyn has been kind of toeing the line for the extreme of the party, which is uncharacteristic of him. He has always been very specific about pushing for solutions. I don't always agree with his ideologies, and I don't always agree with the way he does things. But one of the things that I will say about Cornyn, in my opinion, because we're still talking about my opinion, lest I be sued. So in my opinion, John Cornyn has really done a great job of not only supporting his party, but also supporting his constituents. That lately has been lacking because the entirety of the party just wants the dog and pony show. They don't want or care about having any legitimate representation. They want to have this big inflammatory, it's a big production. It's a big bunch of political theater. And that's one of the things that Ken Paxton, while he may not be good at following the law, he is great at political theater. Ken Paxton, if you'll note, is the one that went all across the country trying to hunt people down for whatever their personal preferences is, no matter what state they lived in. He has gone against his life-saving medications. Like, for example, there's one particular medication that saves people's lives in a lot more cases than not. And everybody thinks that there's this demon situation where, oh, it's just trying to take over our families and children. It's all the political theater, when the reality of the situation is the science behind that particular medication, or the facts behind this particular choice that he's making, has nothing to do with what he puts out in the media. So one of the things that Ken Paxton is great at is political theater. It seems to be that to get the support of the party, which is sad for me, you have to have a lot of political theater. And I think that it does a disservice to the constituents. I think it does a disservice to everyone in the state. And honestly, when we're talking about a choice between Paxton and Cornyn, do you want a representative? If all your choices are that, right? Do you want a representative that is going to represent everyone in the state, or do you want someone doing a dog and pony show for their national leaders?
So let's dive into the mud a little bit. Let's talk about the divorce and why it's happening.
So,
And the
Alex-
history of Kim Paxton and his wife.
yeah, I think that's
So
important.
I think that's a fun topic to explore for some of the viewers.
Well, and normally I wouldn't be so willing to pick apart someone's personal life, right? Except for Ken Paxton seems to put that into our politics. So we had an incident where he may have gotten a new kitchen. Maybe it was because he did or didn't. I don't know. He was working with a developer, and it seems that there were some little whistleblower antics going on where people were like, "Hey, this guy is not doing the right thing." And by the way, he's securing positions for his girlfriend in this business, or he's got his buddy over here with that business. Why are they getting special treatment? So we had a whistleblower suit come forward. It was determined that Ken Paxton was wrong and owed money, and then he asked the state to pay the money he owed. He wanted our tax dollars to pay for that. So during that time, of course, there was the mistress who at the time had kind of faded a little bit into the background. It was more about the actions and less about the people. And we had a hearing, an impeachment hearing, and Ken Paxton, loud and proud, definitely came out and was saying that, oh, if you vote against me, if you vote to impeach me, I'm going to make sure it's hard for you. And that wasn't a direct quote. That's just the consensus of the multiple times that he reached out and put out statements. So one of the things that we find is that Senator Angela Paxton, who is Ken Paxton's husband, was at the hearings. She gave us a chance she had a chance then to divorce him and let us do the same. Instead of letting us divorce him, she stood by her man. And then it comes out, a few months ago, they haven't been living together for a year or more. They not only haven't been living together, but she's divorcing him for biblical reasons. Now, I looked that up, and the Bible will let you divorce someone for cheating on your wife. Here's the thing. They have their divorce sealed. The proceedings are sealed. There's a watchdog group coming out trying to have it unsealed. And honestly, I support it, because if you're a senator, and I understand keeping your personal life and your professional life separate, but if you're a senator and the entirety of an impeachment, it hinges on your personal life, there's proof of it, there's no question about it. It is a thing that happened. And they're like, yeah, I did this thing and it was wrong and I'm sorry. And you, as a senator, now let your personal life interfere with our legislation and impeachment of our officials that have definitely been found to have done it incorrectly and to have breached their oath, right? Then, as a senator, respectfully, Angela, if you ever see this, you didn't give us a chance to divorce him. We want to know everything.
There you go. Absolutely. Who do you think? I'm asking you to call the horse race. Who do you think has a better chance of winning as it stands? Cornyn,
Um,
Paxton.
Unfortunately, I think that Paxton has more support overall.
Oh,
I don't want that to be true. And I'm hoping that they get dirty about it and they're really straightforward about it, because here's the problem. Cornyn is historically, and he's getting a little stale, don't get me wrong. Okay? He needs to pull it together and be a little more upfront and be a little more present. Um I think that right now, even though the polling shows that Cornyn is ahead, if it's going to happen between the two Republicans, let's pretend for just the moment that there's no chance of a Democrat winning. If it's going to go between the two Republicans, unfortunately, that political theater makes a big difference when we're talking about what people understand of their representatives. So you'll see the headline and move past it. Oh, Cornyn's doing this. Oh, Paxton's doing that. Nobody pays attention to the headline where one of the reasons he was impeached or no, I'm sorry, not impeached, but his SEC violations that he fought for 8 years were because he took $330,000 from a Republican colleague for a startup that never came to fruition, right? So we're talking about someone who doesn't have a problem lying, even to their own friends and even to their own colleagues. And so, if you say a lie enough times, you can get people to believe it. And I think that the integrity, the shred of integrity that Cornyn has left is to his detriment at this point. Unfortunately, it's to his detriment, because what we want is politicians that are honest. What we want is people that are going to represent us as a whole, no matter who they are or where they come from. And what's happening right now is it's to the whichever one puts on the best show. And Ken Paxton, with his position as a state attorney general, he is more upfront in the media, because all he like anytime he's going and saying, hey, we want religion in schools, that gets attention, because John Cornyn's not doing that. John Cornyn is campaigning. Ken Paxton is still working within the state of Texas. So John Cornyn is kind of disconnected from people's viewpoint. And I think that really it would do him a service to be more active, and not just campaign in the state, but really get active with his appearances in the state. We could use a visit from him, right? If he wants to win. And he's won so many times over time because he's got the he's red team, right? It's that red team, blue team. And one of the things that I will give a critique also to the Democratic Party in Texas, we have some great representatives. We have some amazing people that are trying to fight the good fight, but we don't as a party, they don't put enough emphasis on Texas rural areas. There's many areas there's not a Democrat to vote for. There's just not. It's like, oh, well, Texas flipped, we're not going to worry about that anymore, and off we go. And I think that causes some really harmful optics when you do have someone that's campaigning in the state from outside of the state. So in people's minds right now, people like John Cornyn are kind of outside because they're on a national scale. He lives here, but He doesn't, it's kind of disconnected. So those are the challenges I think that he has just from an outsider looking in. I believe that he has some challenges just with keeping his name and his face out in front of people. And I would love to see some healthy competition from the Democratic representatives. I would love to see an independent step up and say, "Hey, I've had enough of these two guys having it out, or I've had enough of these two parties having it out. Pick me," right? I would love to see any amount of that in Texas. Unfortunately, because Paxton is our attorney general, you're going to see him more upfront in all of these discussions, and I think that's going to influence people.
I see your point of view. I really do. You said an important thing about the Democrats. And here in Ohio, where I'm at, and several points across the U.S. in red states, I believe that voters feel disaffected, and left behind by the Democratic Party because their state is red, and they don't see Democratic presence in their area. They are, it's kind of like a dry well. And from what you're saying, Texas is one of those spots. Rural Texas. And I see it in rural Ohio. I've talked to other people across the country, and they're telling me the same thing.
Yeah. And realistically, the Republicans feel disaffected too. They really do. This isn't
Yeah.
this isn't this is a people problem. This isn't a party problem. The parties are their own entities, and they're up there doing whatever it is they do for whatever argument there is. And I think that there is some amount, especially in deep red states like Texas, in even deep blue states like California. I'd gladly give the critique that this is not unique to any party. That once you spend more time having the the theater production than you do paying attention to what's good for your people, you will always have vast groups disaffected and or feeling disaffected. I think that if I were to give any advice to any of our representatives on how to do this differently, I would definitely say that bipartisanship is not always the answer, but being very specific to be factual, truthful, and stop trying to make it a big game. And that's one of the downsides here in a state like mine, in a state like yours. There's so much involved in winning the game. There are deals like Dustin Burrows is a perfect example. He's our House Speaker. Dustin Burrows was up against, oh, I can't remember who he was up against. But Dustin Burrows was up against another Republican for the speakership. And one of the things that he did was he talked to the local Democrats that were in office and said, "Hey, I need your help getting this vote. By the way, I'll consider the gambling thing." Like it's not a secret. They were talking, the rumor is, it's not a secret, but it's a rumor, that they were talking about how they had the gambling that we haven't brought to Texas yet, right? We've got Louisiana has gambling, Oklahoma has gambling, Texas doesn't. We have the lottery, but we can't go to the casino or resort style setting and go gamble. So there's plenty of people on both sides of the aisles that are like, "Hey, we want to be able to do this instead of drive over to Oklahoma or have to leave for Louisiana." So that was one of the things that was rumored to have hinged on Burrows getting the speakership. Great. That benefits big business. That's wonderful. Yay, we're going to have more tax abatements for large casinos this time instead of just large businesses. Great, we're going to have some jobs created with a high turnover rate. but it doesn't do anything for the people. And that's the problem, is that they're so scared of pissing off their party on whatever side that they stick so close to party lines instead of people lines. And I think that that's a critique that can be made in any heavily saturated area that is either one way or the other. I think that there's a lot better morality at this point, on the standpoint of the Democratic Party. But as a whole, it doesn't matter what color shirt you wear or what hat you want to put on that day or how you feel about this person's politics or that person's politics. It affects someone. And one of the things that they've ignored, and this is across the board, is how everyone is going to be affected, not how some people are going to be affected. And that is something that the Republican Party is very bad at. And unfortunately, in some of these areas, rural areas in Texas, that's one of the things that we see also from the Democratic Party, because it's like, can't win, won't try. And there's not representatives that are going, oh, well, hey, I want to make a change, because they're probably going to get whooped, right? But it's the lack of trying. It's the lack of trying. And you're going to fail more times than you succeed in everything you do. So why not try?
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. We have come to the end of the show, Fela. I can't thank you enough for being here. I appreciate you.
Great
And
chat. I'm glad to be here.
thank you for being part of the Nerd Herd.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll get together again and I'll tell you some more things I heard.
That'll be wonderful. You have a great day, and everyone have a great day, and come back for more.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.